Let me first summarize the old contents. So suppose you're given a problem to solve. So there will be certain ingredients in a given problem. So those are first the governing equation, then initial and boundary conditions, and the physical domain on which you are going to solve the problem. So these will be given in any physical problem that you are about to solve. So if you have such a problem, then you first discretize the domain, the physical domain that you're given into finite volumes or cells. So this is the first step known as domain discretization. Next, you will find the finite volume update equation for each cell. This is done by doing control volume analysis in each cell, which we have seen quite some time back. So this is basically known as discretization of governing equations. So this by control volume analysis, you will obtain an equation. So that's going to be the discretized form of the given governing equation. So this way you have now discretized the domain and discretized the governing equation. So now in any finite volume method, you will be storing your values at the cell centers, UJ bars at the cell centers. These are cell averages and these will be stored at cell centers. And these are the values for which you will be solving for using your update equation. But in the same update equation, you have some values at cell interfaces also, that they are fluxes. And now you have to evaluate those values by some method. Because you only store values at cell centers and not at cell interfaces, you will have to develop some method to, find values of G at cell centers. Uh, First, we saw two different ways. One is to evaluate these using FTCS method with some additional numerical diffusion. So this is the first way. Next is to use upwind techniques. So under upwind techniques, we have been seeing fine flux vector splitting. We saw Steger and Warming and Van Leer's flux vector splitting methods. Then we saw Riemann solvers, under which we saw Gorunov's exact Riemann solver and Rowe's approximate Riemann solver. Rowe's approximate Riemann solver is essentially a flux difference splitting method. I'll show you why we call it as a flux difference splitting method, because the interface, these are the expressions for interface fluxes. This is essentially the expression for the value of flux at the interface. So this is the average flux, and this part is the numerical diffusion flux. Here, if you notice, we have a flux difference. This is a difference in flux between right and left of the left values of the interface. About the interface, you have right and left values. You take a difference of those and you are keeping it here. So that is essentially coming up in the numerical diffusion flux. So this flux difference has been split up using this sign. Whenever this value is positive, you'll have some flux difference. You won't be solving this exact equation becomes different depending on the sign of this a bar. If a bar is positive, then you'll have a minus sign over here. This equation can be separated into two different equations depending on the sign of a bar itself. So you have average flux. This can sometimes be negative and sometimes be positive. So depending on your sign, this equation is split up into two different equations, and this sign essentially splits this flux difference only. Sometimes the flux difference is going to be positive. So this method is also known as flux difference splitting method. So Rowe's approximate Riemann solver is essentially a flux difference splitting method. So as of now, we have seen flux vector splitting and Riemann solvers. Now let us see kinetic schemes, for which we first have to look into some basics of kinetic theory. So, first, kinetic theory has some assumptions. So one is the molecular hypothesis, and next is applicability of classical conservation laws, and the other one is applicability of statistical methods. So under molecular hypothesis, we have certain assumptions. So first is all matter is made up of molecules, as we all know. So this is some, an assumption that we already know of. Okay? This is some statement that we are already aware of. And next is molecules are the smallest parts of matter with the same chemical properties. So we after the we have gone to finding other basic smallest parts of matter as well. But here, we are just to go, because in kinetic theory we have only probability distribution functions. So for that, this assumption is good enough. So molecules are the smallest parts of matter with same chemical properties. So this is one assumption. And the other assumption is all molecules are alike. And the other one is we already know changes in arrangement of molecules lead to different states, solid, liquid, and gases. And next is the applicability of classical conservation laws. We know that classical conservation laws involves mass conservation, momentum, and energy conservations. So all of these apply to moving and colliding molecules as well. So this is another assumption, and we know that this is true. And next is applicability of statistical methods. So let's consider a small cubic meter of air near the Earth's surface, and in that cubic meter, you will be having approximately 10 to the 25 number of molecules. So we have so many number of molecules, and it's not practical for us to follow each molecule separately. For each of them, uh, we'll have to apply Newton's laws, and we'll have to apply initial conditions to solve uh, solve for the next position or the future velocity of a particular molecule. So this is what is done in Lagrangian description and particle-based solvers. But however, it's very difficult to follow each molecule by applying Newton's laws. In particle-based solvers, they don't take all the particles. They just take some representative number of particles and follow each of them. So since it's difficult to follow all the molecules, we go for a statistical description that uses probability distributions. So let us consider a small volume delta V, which is given by delta X, delta Y, delta Z in all three directions. So if you just consider a spherical coordinate, it's going to be just delta cube R. So this small volume is actually macroscopically very small, but microscopically large. In the sense that, when I say it's macroscopically small, this volume is not, doesn't satisfy the continuum hypothesis at the macroscopic level. But this volume is large enough to contain, to approximate the number of molecules into some probability distribution. Go for statistical analysis. Instead of going for exact analysis of each molecule, it's microscopically large enough to go for statistical description. But however, it's macroscopically small enough to go for continuum hypothesis. That's what it means when I say that the volume is small. And the number of molecules in this volume is delta cube n. So, and with these two expressions, we can get the local number density, which is limit delta cube r tends to 0 of delta cube n by delta cube r. So this gives the number of molecules per unit. This is actually the number of molecules per unit volume. This alone is the number of molecules per unit volume. This, when taken limit, it becomes the local number density. And since we take limit, we can write this whole thing as d cube n by d cube r. So this becomes the number density of molecules in that volume. So now in this scale, this is number density in physical space, because we have only considered the physical space, delta x, delta y, and delta z. In kinetic theory, since there we have a large variation in molecular velocities, basically. So velocities vary from -infinity to infinity, and they take any random value. So it's better for us to consider velocity, molecular velocities also as another independent variable. So along with the physical position variables, x1, x2, x3, we consider velocities also as another independent variable. So we have 6 independent variables right now. So this becomes the phase space. This is a physical space where we have only the position variables as independent variables. Whereas in the phase space, you consider both position variables and velocity variables as independent variables. So let us now, write the same expression, this number density itself for some volume in phase space. Previously, it was written for some volume in physical space. So let us now write it for some volume in phase space. So now this is the number density in phase space, and this is the number of molecules, and this represents the volume of the element in phase space. And this is the volume in physical space, and this is a volume in velocity space. So this is actually our number density now. This is equivalent to n of r, but it's a function of velocity also. So now let us integrate this number dense, this with respect to only velocity volume. So fp of r vector comma v vector is actually, from this expression, fp becomes d to the 6n by dq bar, right? This fp into d cube v becomes d to the 6n by dq bar. So when you integrate this quantity, you'll get something as a function of r vector alone, because you have integrated this quantity out with respect to velocity. So and you substitute the limits, all the velocity variables will go out. So this whole thing is now only a function of position variable alone. So I'm writing that as n of r vector. This is quite equivalent to the number density in phase space, physical space right now. This is number density in phase space. When it's integrated with respect to velocity, it becomes equivalent to number density in physical space. So this notation is, this integration with respect to d cube v is given this notation. We use this less than sign and greater than sign on either sides of fp. So this is actually this. We are defining this thing by this notation, basically. So, from this, let us now obtain the macroscopic variables rho, rho u vector, and rho e. So we know that all molecules are assumed to be alike. So we can assume same mass for all of them. So to this number density in physical space, let us now multiply mass. So that becomes n of r vector into m. So since mass is a variable, it's just a constant with respect to this velocity variable, you can take it inside the integration. So you can get MFP of this integral of this MFP. So you of course can write MFP in this form, in this notation. So let us now define MFP as just F. Instead of MFP, we can write it as just F. So this part is actually the macroscopic density. This is number density into mass. Number density of molecules in physical space into mass becomes the macroscopic density. So therefore, the macroscopic density can be just written as F, and we know we have defined this to be this integral. So let us now find the macroscopic momentum. So to the same number density, let us just multiply mass into macroscopic momentum. So we'll get something like this. This v vector. V vector is the molecular velocity, whereas u vector is the macroscopic velocity. So this v vector into f vector. So this integral gives the macroscopic momentum actually. And the macroscopic energy is given by this integral. So half into v dot v vector dot v vector into f. Integral of that gives macroscopic energy, total energy, it's not specific energy. So you do dot product of microscopic velocities to get, and that with f gives macroscopic energy. So your conserved variable vector consisting of rho u, and rho e can be written as this. So this is just the same thing. You know that this sign represents integration. So basically, you integrate f. You first multiply f with this vector. This is the moment function vector. For rho, you just put 1 over here. For rho u vector, we multiply f with v vector, and for rho e, we multiply f with this quantity, half v dot v. So basically this. So you write this as a vector and you do this integration process. So you give this kind of notation here. And this vector is known as moment function vector, and this is notated by psi. So now simply we can write u as integral of psi f dv. So u can be basically obtained from f. From this we can evidently see that. So from the microscopic description, we can go to macroscopic description. So that is using just the, in microscopic description, we have this quantity f, which is the number density. So now we can obtain the macroscopic variables rho u, and rho e by using this microscopic number density itself. So this is some inference that we are getting out of all this. So let's consider further, let's make further arguments. So first let's consider monoatomic molecules. So, monoatomic molecule can only translate in X, Y, and Z directions. Whereas, polyatomic molecule can do all kind of motions, translation, vibration, and rotation. So for that, I have just considered to represent this, I've only considered a diatomic molecule, which is a special case of polyatomic molecule. So, this diatomic molecule can translate in X, Y, and Z directions, and it can vibrate. That is, these molecules can either come closer towards each other or can go farther away from each other. So, this bond can pull them closer or farther. So this is vibration. Rotation is together they can, rotate. So in the physical space, their position of each molecule will be different upon rotation. Whereas monoatomic molecule, if it rotates about itself, the position is still going to be the same. So there's not going to be any much variation, because we have assumed the molecule to be sort of isotropic or something, so it's not going to make any change. Whereas diatomic molecule, when it rotates, it's going to make a difference in the physical space. So if we consider all three motions, translation, vibration, and rotation for a polyatomic molecule, whereas for a monatomic molecule, we only consider translation. So these additional vibrational and rotational degrees of freedom, that is these two. Translation is just common for everything, whereas vibration and rotation is there only for polyatomic molecules, and these additional degrees of freedom, they contribute to internal energy. So as of now, we have not seen how internal energy is coming up in rho e. We have just taken only kinetic contribution from the microscopic description. We have only taken half v dot p to f. We have not taken internal energy contribution. So for that, we are going to add I over here. For polyatomic molecules, we'll be having this I, whereas for monatomic molecules, we'll not have I. So I is basically the internal energy corresponding to non-rotational, non-translational degrees of freedom, rotational and vibration. So this is a general form for you. To the previous thing, we have just added I. And we are going, and now this psi f represents integration with respect to di as well. This notation, from now on, it represents a 4 integral quantity. Previously, it was just a 3 integral quantity with only with the integration variables being v1, v2, and v3. From now on, we will consider integration with respect to I as well. So, because we have internal energy, we integrate our quantity with respect to internal energy as well. So now let us consider more relations. Now that we have defined your macroscopic variables, let us consider more relations. That is, we have not yet defined stress tensor and heat flux vector. Let us define those also. Now the pressure tensor is minus of stress tensor, as we all know from the macroscopic relations. Is written as P delta Ij minus tau Ij, where tau Ij is the shear stress tensor and P delta Ij is the, the isotropic component of stress. So this is the full pressure tensor, and this is written in microscopic form as psi integral of psi Ci Cj into F, where C vector is given by V vector minus U vector. So this is basically the relative velocity of molecule with respect to fluid velocity. Fluid velocity is U vector and V vector is molecular velocity. C vector is basically the relative velocity. So this is also known as, peculiar or thermal or random velocities. We call it either relative velocity or peculiar velocity or thermal or random velocities. So this is the definition for pressure tensor. And for heat flux vector, we have such a definitions. Integral of psi Ci F. Relative velocities actually contribute to pressure and heat flux tensors. Whereas for, the conserved variables, rho u, and rho e, the microscopic velocity V has contribution. So now that we have defined all the quantities in macroscopic equation, let us move on to the definitions for molecular velocity distribution function and equilibrium distribution functions. So we have just seen that the number density is integral of Fp, and that is this integral basically. So let us normalize Fp as Fp tilde given by Fp by n of R vector. So Fp tilde is basically the fraction of all molecules in our physical space with velocities between V vector and V vector plus D cube vector. This quantity represents the fraction of molecules. This Fp is the number density in phase space. So it defines the number of molecules in at each point in your phase space given by delta cube R and delta cube V around V. That is V in this volume. Delta cube V is a volume around this with the central point as V vector. So this is the velocity volume, and the physical volume is delta cube R around some central point R vector. So in that volume, your Fp by Nr is the fraction, denotes the fraction of all molecules in that phase space with velocities around between this value. So now this is your fraction. So in this integral, we now get, this expression now becomes this expression because of this normalization. So we get integral fp tilde equals 1. So this normalization helps us to, normalize this integral basically. So fp tilde is since fp tilde is the fraction of all molecules in delta Q bar with velocities in this velocity volume, we have fp tilde to be the conditional probability of finding a molecule in velocity space with volume element d cube v around v vector, and provided the condition here is if the molecule is in physical space d cube bar around r. So this is the condition. If this condition is satisfied, we can search for, in this physical space. If this condition is satisfied, that means in this physical space, we can search for molecules with velocities in this volume, velocity volume, that is v vector plus d cube v. So that's going to be a volume. So in that volume, in this physical space, if we have velocities with the range from v vector to v vector plus d cube v vector, then those volumes, those number of molecules will represent the will help us to evaluate fp tilde, that is the number density. So any doubts here?
No, ma'am.
Okay, fine. So this is our normalization. So as of now, F is, we have seen earlier that F is MFP. It's not a vector basically. So we have defined earlier, right? F to be MFP. So when the definition of macroscopic densities, here we have defined F to be equal to MFP. And Fp now is defined as Fp tilde into n of r. So we have m n of r into Fp tilde of r vector comma v vector. So m into n of r is rho of r vector and into this quantity. So basically all F, Fp and Fp tilde represent the same thing but with different kind of normalization, I would say, because F denotes, Fp is basically the phase space density, the number density in phase space. And to that, if you multiply M, you get the molecular density in phase space, that is F. And this Fp, when normalized, this F is also, this molecular density is also equal to rho into Fp tilde. Because this is integral of this will give us 1, and this is this integral of all of this should give us basically density. That's what I mean to say. To all of this, if you do integration, you will get density anyways. So all of them are equal. So now that we have defined our molecular velocity distribution function, let us now define our equilibrium distribution function. So, in thermodynamics, we would have come across the so-called perfect thermodynamic equilibrium. So where you don't consider any flow, you consider your domain, that is the whole system, to be in perfect thermodynamic equilibrium. That means that your domain, your system is untouched. Nothing moves inside your system. Your system is kind of steady. So there's no flow and there is no spatial and temporal variation. So that's what is meant by perfect thermodynamic equilibrium. But when you require some flow to happen, you consider the gradients, you consider something known as local thermodynamic equilibrium. And when gradients of U and T are small, in your Navier-Stokes equation, your second order quantities, second order gradients of velocity and temperature. Basically, the gradient of stress and gradient of heat flux represents second order gradients of velocity and temperature. So they are neglected. Since your gradients of U and T are small, they can be neglected. So your Navier-Stokes equation becomes the Euler's equations upon this assumption of local thermodynamic equilibrium. So local thermodynamic equilibrium allows for flow to happen, but it only allows for Eulerian, flow without any viscous or heat diffusion. It allows only Euler's equations. Whereas perfect thermodynamic equilibrium does not allow any flow at all. In kinetic theory, you will define the equilibrium distribution function to be at a local thermodynamic equilibrium only. So this is how your equilibrium distribution function will be defined with the assumption of local thermodynamic equilibrium. And we have this Maxwellian distribution function. F equilibrium is defined as this quantity. Rho and I naught is given by this expression, which is an average for internal energy I, and beta is given by 1/2 RT. And here V vector is the microscopic velocity, molecular velocity, and U vector is the macroscopic fluid velocity. So this is now your Maxwellian distribution function. In 1D, it will be very simple, the usual Maxwellian distribution function that you will be knowing of. So this is the point where V is close to U, and this is going to be your one-dimensional Maxwellian distribution. So now we have defined F equilibrium and all that. So and also we know that if F is known, we can find U because we have defined the moments for the conserved variable vector. All the conserved variables rho U and rho E can be obtained from F itself by taking some integration. We will be calling those integration as moments from here on. So we have defined some integration, right? This thing is equal to some integral of dv d cube v di. So this is basically will be known as we will be calling these things as moments from here on. So we know that u can be obtained from F, but how will we obtain F? So for that, we'll look at Boltzmann's equation. So Boltzmann's equation is basically an evolution equation for F itself. F is a probability distribution function. We have seen how it becomes the probability distribution function. It's actually a conditional probability of finding molecules with velocity in the velocity volume in the physical space given by dq bar around r vector. So that way it becomes a probability distribution function. So Boltzmann's equation is an evolution equation for F. So first term is the temporal convection term and the second one is the spatial convection. Whereas this is the external force term, and on the right hand side we have collision term. So this is basically an integral differential equation because all the quantities on the left hand side are differentials, whereas this df by dt of collision is an integral actually. So it's a complicated integral basically. So here this integral is represented between two different molecular distribution functions, F1 and F, before collision. That is F1 and F represent two different molecular distribution functions before collision. And F1 prime and F prime represent their post-collision distribution functions. V1 and V represent their pre-collision velocities. B represents their impact factor and epsilon represents the azimuthal angle between these two molecular distribution functions. So Boltzmann uses this collision operator, this collision function in his Boltzmann's equation. Whereas after some time, we got this BGK collision model given by Bhatnagar, Gross, and Krug. So Bhatnagar is actually, I think he was a professor in IISc. He was associated with IISc in Max department. So this model was given by them. So they took off this collision operator, that is this complex integral, and they wrote a simple function, just minus 1 over TR into F minus F equilibrium. So now they define F equilibrium to be some function. This is a nonlinear function. We'll see how it becomes nonlinear later. So this is the collision operator given by them. So after this was introduced, people followed this mostly. This is quite a common collision operator. So in Boltzmann's equation, instead of this collision operator, we use a BGK collision operator. So, now in the Boltzmann's equation, let us neglect this external force term. And instead of in the place of collision operator, let us substitute the BGK collision model. So now we have this Boltzmann's equation. This is a simplified Boltzmann's equation. So now this can be separated into two different operators. This is one operator and this is the other operator. So now let us just say that we have this equation right now. And let's consider this to be operator 1 of F and this to be operator 2 of F. So now let us pause it here and let's go for a detour. So suppose, if the operators are linear, we can represent them by matrices. Here they are not linear, but suppose if they are linear, we can represent them by matrices such as AF and BF, where A and B are matrices. So we'll be having dou F by dou T equals AF plus BF. The same equation 1 can become something like this. Dou F by dou T equals A plus B into F. So this is now an ODE and solution for this is going to be F of T equals e to the A plus B into T. Now this solution can be split up into something like this. F of T equals e to the AT and F of T equals e to the BT. This is not exact because e power A plus B into T. So e power x is basically 1 plus x squared by some factorial, 2 factorial maybe, and it goes on. So when you have e power A plus B, you'll be having x in place of x, you'll be having A plus B into T. And in place of x squared, you will be having A plus B the whole squared into T squared. So, this can be written as A squared plus B squared plus AB plus BA. These are matrices. You cannot just write them as 2AB. So you have AB plus BA. So, these matrices need not be commutator. So this splitting of operators, like in the sense, let me call this to be F1 and this to be F2. First you will solve this equation. That is, first you will be solving this ODE to get F1 of T equals e power BT. And the solution for this ODE will be used to find the solution, will be used as an initial condition for this ODE, and then you will be solving this one. So this is known as operator splitting. This is what happens in operator splitting. And here you are basically your solutions will be something like e power BT into e power AT. This is not exactly equal to e power A plus B into T because we have BA also. And here from this thing we will never get e power BAT. But e power A plus B ABT will give us some contribution of BA. So that can never be obtained from here. So this is basically a first order approximation. We can see that it's a first order approximation. And this is a basic splitting. And we have strand splitting as well, which is a second order splitting. So in that, we basically use, half of first time step in a full first. So it basically goes like e power b by 2t, e power at, and e power b by 2t. In the next time step again, you will have e power b by 2t, e power at, and e power b by 2t. So eventually this will become e power bt only. So this is close to our old splitting, but only at the corners we'll be having e power b by 2t. So corners in the sense the initial time step and the last time step. So in those cases, we'll be having e power b by 2t. But in the interior time steps, these will be equal to the same old splitting only. But this leads to second order accuracy. So people do this kind of operator splitting, to separate the different kinds of physics. Is it clear? Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll remove all these. So this is basically operator splitting. We do operator splitting to separate the physics or to separate, stiff terms in the equation. So suppose if your first operator represents convection and your second operator represents source term, or if your second operator represents pressure, and if you want to find the solution for them separately, you do operator splitting. Or if your first operator requires some time step delta t, and if your second operator requires some time step tau. So let me say this operator requires some time step tau and this requires some time step delta t, where delta t is much larger than tau. In these cases, you will require some kind of splitting to separate the different physics to deal with stiff source terms easily. So in those cases, we do operator splitting. So this is basically the idea of operator splitting. So for this, I took this assumption that things are linear. But in our case, things are not linear, but still we can go about doing this assumption operator splitting. I mean, just to have this ease with matrices, I used this linear assumption. But we need not always have matrices. We can have nonlinear functions over here as well, which can also be splitted. So we can split nonlinear functions also. So here I'm trying to split our equation in this way. So this is the collision term and this is our spatial convection. So I'm splitting them both. So these are the split equations. So now why I did this is to, to understand what is happening when we are simulating the system. So this is we are plotting f with respect to some time t, and this blue curve is the equilibrium distribution function. In the whole domain, we have all f. In this whole plane, we have f with respect to t. And this is the curve that represents the equilibrium distribution function, f equilibrium. So, this equation represents convection. So this green line, you initially start with equilibrium. At one time step, you start with equilibrium. Your system is in equilibrium at nth time step, say. So now you undergo this operation. This operation leads to convection. So your F equilibrium will deviate from F equilibrium basically. It will convect and go to some random F. So it's deviating from F equilibrium. And through collision step, it's again moving back to F equilibrium. This is the next time step basically. So at the end of each time step, your system is in equilibrium. I mean, in between the time step, your system is in non-equilibrium, but at each time step, your system is in equilibrium. So that's what this splitting gives. This is the inference that we get out of this splitting basically. So your convection step drives your system uh, away from equilibrium, whereas your collision step drives your system towards equilibrium. So through this operator splitting, we are just having a good inference. So now let us do further simplifications. So let us consider some, I told you, this is the collision operator, right? Your system is going towards equilibrium, and TR here is the relaxation time. TR is basically the time that your system takes to relax towards equilibrium. So TR is usually much smaller than your macroscopic time scales. So you can assume this local, you would have read in fluid dynamics books that, in fluid dynamics, we go for thermodynamics assumption, and we define our variables pressure and temperature, which are thermodynamic variables. And in thermodynamics, we assume perfect thermodynamic equilibrium of a system. So how come, these the relations, thermodynamic relations that we have obtained by making this perfect thermodynamic equilibrium assumption works in fluid mechanics? How do we use those relations in fluid mechanics to obtain the equations of state and all? Any idea?
Ma'am, I did not get the question.
So, in thermodynamics, we have this assumption of equilibrium, and all the relations that we derive in thermodynamics are based on this assumption that your system is in equilibrium, the thermodynamic relations. And we use those relations in fluid dynamics where there is flow happening, which is not in equilibrium. So, how do we use those relations that are derived for equilibrium in case of fluid mechanics where actually the system is not in equilibrium?
Oh, okay, okay.
Is it because it's in a steady state of flow? Is it that reason that you can define these thermodynamic variables?
I mean, that has some, yeah. But steady state, what do you mean by steady state?
Those parameters aren't varying with respect to space or time. So you can assume that at a particular location, you can define these variables: temperature, pressure.
Yeah, they are, but at a particular location, pressure and temperature are constant. But at a location very close to that location in a fluid flow, pressure and temperature also can vary, and the value here at the next location can be different. The thing,
Yeah, okay. So they're steady, but they vary with space.
yeah, they vary with space, but they can vary with time as well. At the same point, your solution is evolving. The fluid flow can be anything, right?
Okay, okay. So that's not the answer. Okay, ma'am.
It has something to do with this relaxation time, TR. So, at a different scale. So this process of equilibrium, thermodynamic equilibrium, is happening at a much smaller scale. So, your system is being driven to equilibrium at a very small time. So when we say that your system is in equilibrium, you say that only then you can measure these variables, pressure and temperature. Only in equilibrium we can measure pressure and temperature. But basically, you have molecular collisions and convection, molecular motions and convections happening. So in that scale, things are quite random. But they get driven to equilibrium very fast. That is, this TR is much smaller than the macroscopic timescales that we are measuring the variables at. We measure the variables at some time scales. These pressure and temperature at the macroscopic scales are measured at some time scale. Those are very large compared to this relaxation time in which this pressure and temperature actually evolves. So at a point when we consider some smaller scale, your molecules are moving and colliding. So those motion represents non-equilibrium. The convection represents non-equilibrium, whereas collision represents equilibrium. So this TR is the time with which the molecular motion takes to get towards equilibrium. I mean, this TR is the time in which your F goes to F equilibrium, basically. So your molecules go towards equilibrium in this time. Okay, so once they are equilibrium, we can measure these variables, pressure and temperature, basically. Once your system is molecular system is in equilibrium, we can measure this these thermodynamic variables, pressure and temperature. And we are measuring those at a very large time scale. This is much larger than TR. So let's call it delta T. So, when we measure the variables at some point, let's say you are in some initial condition where you know the pressure and temperature values. So you are in some time t equals 0. So now at some time t equals 0 in your physical domain, you are able to measure the value for pressure and temperature at all points. Now, the same pressure over time, the variables will evolve with some time tr. Then they'll go to equilibrium. After they go to equilibrium, we can measure pressure and temperature. But we don't measure pressure and temperature at this time tr, but we measure them at a much larger time, say delta t. We are actually in the macroscopic scale, we are actually measuring them at a much larger time. We are actually looking at them at a much larger time. So we can see for the values of pressure and temperature now in this domain at a later time. Also. So this assumption of thermodynamic equilibrium that's happening in thermodynamics is actually valid when in fluid dynamics because of this reason. That is, during this evolution time, during this time, we cannot measure pressure and temperature. Once your system from T equals 0 achieves TR, then after that, at any time, you can measure your pressure and temperature, basically. So this is our time scale in the macroscopic level. So all our macroscopic equations, the Navier-Stokes equations, evolve in this time scale, not in this time scale. So we are comfortably evolving pressure and temperature. We have d by dt of, we have d by dx of pressure and all, right? All the evolution variables, pressure and temperature can be evolved. We have d by dt of t also. We are looking at this large time scale, not at this small time scale, basically. That's why we can measure, we can have equations for evolution equations for temperature or pressure in macroscopic scales. So this is the reason. So any doubts?
No. Yes. Ma'am,
How do we? Yeah, carry on. Okay.
no, it's fine. Go.
Ma'am, how do we know that these relaxation times are small enough? Like, how do we know that they are small enough that system can reach thermal equilibrium so quick before we take a fluid, before we measure fluid variables?
Okay, how do we know that? I'm not sure. How do we? So things that happen in the microscopic scales are they have very small scales, right? They happen faster than all the things in the macroscopic scales. But these are some assumptions that we make, basically. And these assumptions are actually working.
Okay, ma'am. So we assume because of random molecular motion, it is reaching thermal equilibrium much quicker.
Yeah.
Okay, ma'am.
These are assumptions.
Ma'am, so in one way we can say that it all boils down to the assumption of continuity itself, right? Because there again we assume the mean free path and all with the characteristic length to get the same sort of inference out.
Yeah, we have, yes, if the Knudsen number is small, then yes, that also means that relaxation time is small.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's what ma'am I want.
Yeah. That itself means that the relaxation time is small. Yeah. And only for such systems we can go about doing this assumption. Only for such systems, this macroscopic conservation laws are valid. Otherwise, we need to go for microscopic description, at least statistical description.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay. So this is why we take our relaxation times to be much small. So now suppose to simplify further, suppose we take this relaxation time TR to be 0. That is, it's exactly equal to 0. Now this is actually the simplified form of our previous equation. the Boltzmann, we had a -1 over TR initially over here. I've taken it on the other side. So as TR goes to 0, all the left hand side becomes 0. So we get F to be equal to F equilibrium itself. So instantaneous relaxation means F is always equal to F equilibrium. So we have dou F by dou T plus this is the Boltzmann's equation with F equals F equilibrium. So this is basically a linear convection equation. So now let us take moment of this equation. So this is our simplified Boltzmann's equation. So for this we are taking moment by using our moment function vector psi. So this will give us our macroscopic conserved variables. So we know integral of psi f gives our conserved variable u, and integral of psi VIF gives GI. So by taking moment of this linear convection equation, we get Euler's equations. So basically, when your system is in local thermodynamic equilibrium, we say it local thermodynamic equilibrium because at every point, in the macroscopic scale, if we consider a point, then if we zoom in further, there are lots of molecular distribution functions, and if we zoom in further, there are lots of molecules. So at every point we consider our F, that is the molecular distribution function, to be exactly equal to F equilibrium itself. In that case, we get Euler's equation. That is, locally, your things are all in equilibrium. That is, at every point, your F is equal to F equilibrium. So in this case, we get the Euler's equations. So this is, in a different way, I talked about this earlier. Like here, we assumed the gradients to be small and we neglected or second order derivatives, and we got the Euler's equations by local thermodynamic equilibrium. So here, in a more formal way, we get local thermodynamic equilibrium directly gives us Euler's equations, because local thermodynamic equilibrium implies F equals F equilibrium itself. So we always get Euler's equations upon assuming local thermodynamic equilibrium. So now, we know that macroscopic variables can be obtained from molecular descriptions, that is statistical descriptions. And we can formulate kinetic or Boltzmann schemes based on this strategy. This is actually known as the moment method strategy. So taking moment of this linear convection equation to get Euler's equations is known as the moment method strategy. And we use this to formulate kinetic schemes, numerical schemes for actually finding our fluxes at interfaces in finite volume method. So we can use this kinetic theory description, and based on this, we can develop kinetic schemes with which we can evaluate the fluxes at interfaces. So those are known as kinetic schemes. So, and one more thing, this F equilibrium is nonlinear because we have already defined F equilibrium to be this Maxwellian distribution function, and this F equilibrium is a function of our conserved variable u. So we know that because based on this definition, we have used rho over here, we have used u vector over here, and this beta contains temperature, so which can be written as energy. So this F equilibrium is basically a function of our conserved variable vector u, which contains rho u, and rho e. So we also know u can be obtained as a moment of F, use an integral of psi f. And so F equilibrium is a function of u, and which is a function of F. So, in the Boltzmann's equation, okay. So in Boltzmann's equation, this was our left-hand side. This part is linear in F, and this is also linear in F. This term is also linear in F, whereas this term is non-linear in F, because this is a function of u and u is a function of F. we do not know whether that function is going to be linear or non-linear. In general, we can consider it to be non-linear. So Boltzmann's equation is non-linear in collision term and linear in convection term. Unlike, the Navier-Stokes equation, which is non-linear in convection term itself. So Boltzmann's equation is comparatively easy to solve than Navier-Stokes equations. So now let's make a comparison of macroscopic and microscopic descriptions. So in the macroscopic scale, we use wave propagation model with traveling and diffusing waves. Whereas in the microscopic scale, we use particle model with streaming and colliding particles. In the macroscopic scale, we have this continuum approach with Knudsen number much smaller than 1. Whereas this microscopic scale approach is used for both continuum and rarefied regimes. And in the macroscopic thing, we have Navier-Stokes Fourier equations. And in the microscopic thing, we have Boltzmann's equation. So, and in the macroscopic scale, we have our thermodynamic variables and velocity variables U, rho T, P, and U vector. In the molecular description, we have only F. So when we take moments of F, we get macroscopic variables. And in microscopic scale, things are mostly analytical. These coefficients mu, k, and gamma, they are all empirical because we do not have explicit expressions for these in case of macroscopic approach. These are evaluated by using, we get them by using experiments only. Whereas in microscopic thing, all of them are fully analytical. We have expressions for mu, k, and gamma in case of kinetic theory. So, and with regard to CFD algorithms, we have other CFD algorithms like, incompressible CFD, compressible CFD, like flux vector splitting, Riemann solvers, all those. And we can also have kinetic schemes, which is also macroscopic CFD, because we use this kinetic theory description just to evaluate the value of flux at the interface. We'll be getting a macroscopic expression, but to get that macroscopic expression, we'll be using some basics from kinetic theory. So this is always going to be a macroscopic scheme, but with a background from kinetic theory. So those are these schemes. On the other hand, microscopic schemes, we have particle methods, which involves evolution of particles themselves. Molecular gas dynamics and discrete simulation Monte Carlo methods. So those involve tracking each particle separately. And in the middle, we have mesoscopic CFD, lattice gas cellular automata, and lattice Boltzmann method, which is based on lattice gas cellular automata. So lattice Boltzmann method uses, mesoscopic descriptions. That is, it uses lattice Boltzmann method evolves F, that is the molecular distribution function, to find the macroscopic variables. So this involves evolution of F itself. Whereas here we do not have evolution of F. We still have evolution of macroscopic variables U, but in the but to evaluate our fluxes at cell interfaces, we use kinetic theory. Here it's totally evolution of particles themselves. So this is a basic introduction to kinetic theory. So shall we continue or can we take it tomorrow? We have kinetic flux vector splitting method based on kinetic theory itself.
Ma'am, tomorrow what time, if you're taking it?
9 o'clock.
Ma'am, because like our colleges are gonna start from tomorrow and we just shifted like to hostel and all today.
Not it's Sunday tomorrow. Sorry.
Yeah. Ma'am, can we have it like next week or?
Yes, ma'am. I feel we can stop here today.
Okay, fine. So we can have it next week. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay.
Thank you, ma'am.